Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be part 6 of this episode 6, looking at Borobudur in Indonesia and using again this as a stepping stone to look at other connections joining other sites and traditions. And so from the aerial view, what you have is the mandala, not to be confused with the mandorla or the almond, but and this particular pattern, which is a important one. So not too far away, also in Indonesia, we have Prambanan, and that's strictly a Hindu temple. And there again, we can see the temple layout where we have the mandala again, or the yantra, geometric pattern. So it's used in many applications. So here we see another depiction of it. Now, usually the gates are T-shaped as well, which would be reminiscent of some other places, but I wouldn't directly link them immediately. But it represents the universe. This is what the mandala does. Now, it's a way of laying out temples, but also they often make out of sand, like temporary ones. It's also to arrange sacred spaces used for ritual as well, but it can be applied on a large scale to permanent architecture. And again, representing the cosmos. So this shows again what these temples are pointing at, what they represent. And Phnom Penh, for instance, in Angkor, that's just one example. You'll many temples there in Angkor complex are connected to the mandala. And it's interesting that Phnom Penh has 104 of these towers. From ground level, only 33 are visible at maximum from ground level at one time, whatever your angle is, and as I say, 33 guides on Mount Meru. This is another repeated theme throughout as well. Now, that's 104 is interesting because the first two levels of Borobudur each have 104 niches with little Buddhas inside. So that's the first two, but this use of 104, and you see it appearing in other places. Now, I think half of that would be 52 weeks per year, and then that's half of that 26, and break it down to 13. So 13 would be the base number to emerge from that. Now 33 and 13, straight away some might get the connection between there. York Rite 13, Scottish Rite 33, and there's nice links to that, but we'll look closer. But this pattern is also the templum of the sky, or the constitutio limitum, which is an ancient survey technique going back to Roman times to lay out a city as well. Now, that's a nice link because when the Spanish arrived in Tenochtitlan, which is current-day Mexico, one of them noted were the Romans here, because what they found was this Roman layout design as well. This seemed to be like a universal theme pointing as well. That's just a curiosity. I wouldn't direct, but now we also have the Vastu Shastra, which translates in Sanskrit to the science of architecture, and the way of it's basically like the Indian version of feng shui. Now, Surya, for instance, the sun god would be nice links there, because we go back to the various levels here in Borobudur, and so the Vastu Shastra of a square, often like laid out for it. There are many variations of it, but the 4x4 16 and the 64, the 8x8 square, is a pretty prominent one, but goes up to 32 by 32. So we have 32 stupas there, and it's the 1024 pattern. So these ones have these nice links in there. But what's the nicest part is that if you include the top stupa, so what we have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 1, 2, 3 on the circular level, so 8. Then we have the top level, which gives us 9 levels in total, which connects to the Navagraha, which is again this nice connection in there to these ancient Vedic Hindu systems of architecture or ritual as well. And you even see the T-shaped gates there, and the Philfot, the swastika connections in there as well. Now, for instance, Mercury, Venus, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, Sun, Saturn, plus these two, which are the lunar ascending and lunar descending nodes. These are the 9 planets in Hindu Vedic tradition. But notice that the Sun is at the center. So what we have is a 9 square plan that also connects through there, 9 square, and we have 9 levels here. The mandala itself represents the cosmos, the universe, and when we have the 9 planets emerging from there with, again, the Sun at the center. Now, this will link to the modern esoteric Hermetic Western tradition, but I wouldn't say modern. I would say the modern incarnation of it, because it's actually been passed through time. But let's look, for instance, New Haven in the USA, or Bathurst here in Australia. And I'll put a link in the description. Half a Sheep channel went and spoke to an architect, Henry Bialowas, who back in the 80s or the late 70s tried to write his thesis on sacred architecture, and it was not well received. I'll put that link. It's an interesting interview because he was talking about these going back, well, long before the internet's made it sort of popular, and just the reception it got. Now it's, well, a bit more acceptable, but one of the places he was particularly interested in was Bathurst, which was founded by Governor Macquarie, which who I'm interested in because of the way he laid out other towns, and the street plans and the widths of the street, all based on the numbers, just beautiful stuff connecting. But what's interesting is we have the 9 square plan. Well, we see that in New Haven, and we also see it in the original plan of Bathurst. And what's most important is, for instance, here in Bathurst, as Henry Bialowas points out, the central square where the church goes is unbordered and it is unnumbered. And we have the same thing in the oldest plan for New Haven, where the church square, the central square, except for this one drafting line, I would assume, but again, it's they've gone out of their way to make it different. And what, as Henry Bialowas says, what cannot be named, what cannot be numbered. Essentially, it's the omega point of the town plan. Now, well, connections to New Haven, Yale University. Well, there we have Lock and Key and these other secret society buildings, and especially Skull and Bones, where we have these esoteric architecture and traditions linking back through to the modern era, linking back to the ancient era. And so, for instance, do I have a... no. Oh, anyway, the architecture there in New Haven, is it Scroll and Key, Lock and Key, Book and Scroll? I forget the exact name of these other lesser known societies apart from Skull and Bones, where we have the same. We have Caduceus, the Ionic, Doric, Corinthian, and so many other symbols built into the town plan. So even though they may appear very different, even though we might assume because of the cultural differences, the differences in time, and the assumptions we make about how things operate in their well, what you actually find is that the same patterns, numbers, traditions go back in time, and they link the East and the West. And for instance, now the old ancient Mexico, Tenochtitlan, but also in other sites, Mesoamerican sites, where we have the same, so 108 feet, 216 feet, the same, like similar orientations, even the connections now. Now also, for instance, in the Navagraha, where we have Mercury, and well, this is also, you could directly connect these to not only like the 7 visible planets plus the lunar ascending and descending nodes, but also to the alchemical tradition, as in the Sun, gold, the Moon, silver, Mars, iron, copper, Venus, Mercury. Now these are also, whether it's Mesoamerican, whether it's Far East Asia, India, the Middle East, or the Mediterranean, such Egypt, Greece, and other places. These are the essence of metallurgy as well. So Mercury, all these cultures are, gold, silver, copper, Yeah. Anyway, it's all there. So you see multiple layers, multiple forms, and now, for instance, a 9 square plan that would lend itself to be made, because you can't make a 10 square plan, because then it wouldn't be a square. But that these similar features, such as in the unnumbered or the unmarked, just like that ninth stupa at the very top there, so it's separate. It sits higher. It sits different from the rest. It's special in very similar formats, and the use of these particular numbers in not just symbolic senses, but especially in the units of measure as well. So you have a mandala, Vastu Shastra, these ancient symbols and the connecting east to west. Hindus, Buddhists, you'll find similar themes in Islamic architecture. Not too long ago, they found the oldest surviving Quran, and a large part of that Quran was architectural plans and designs. The units of in Islamic units of weights and measure, we see them drawn from, or directly connecting to Byzantine and Roman as well. But and they coming from ancient Egypt, Persia, Sumer, Babylon, and all these other places. So you just find the same repeated themes. That they're not connected is an assumption. That's not, that was a starting belief. But the more you look into things, you see just how close things are. And then if you look into trade empires and how far trade went. So, for example, well documented, the Romans were trading with India by sea. The Indians were trading with where is now Malaysia, and then they to ancient China. So with only 1 or 2 sea journeys, Chinese goods were arriving in Rome. Chinese silk was arriving in Rome in such quantity they had to bring in a special law to protect local toga manufacturers. So it's not. We find artifacts, even Egyptian artifacts, found in ancient graves in Sweden, and they just put the trade links. And if you can trade goods, you can trade knowledge, and it's just been moved across. And for instance, the Buddhist, Taoist, and Hindu connections, well, because it's Asian, so that's okay to join. But for some reason, there's like a lot of people have this imaginary line where Asians can't trade with the Near East or with Europe. Well, why? Because the trade links have always been there. The goods are clearly there. The Silk Road, portions of the Silk Road are known to extend back quite some time. And again, still, it's a very resistant thing that's going on, where we just assume that because they're so far apart, that they can't be in trade good connections, therefore they can't be trading knowledge. But the systems of going back to Mohenjo-Daro are exactly the same weights are used in Old Kingdom Egypt, and they were again being used by Greeks, Romans, then the Islamic ounce and the US silver dollar, the Spanish weights and measure systems, up into the English weights and measure systems. So what we do have is a continuum of temple plans, of sacred number and traditions, and town plans, architectural forms, and I think I mentioned in the last episode that the Greek connections to Buddhism and the Hindu. Anyway, with that, hope you enjoyed and have a good one. But these links are, they're quite tangible, and it's more of to remove ourselves from the mindset of separation. The ancient people were engaged in long trade, so even if the Romans weren't trading directly with the Chinese, it was only 2 or 3 sails away, boat journeys, and there the goods were there. So where goods move, people move. Where people move, knowledge moves. Have a good one.